Welcome back, guys. On this video, we're going to take a look at the domain and the range of a linear function. What is a domain actually before we start with this kind of stuff? I define it as an availability of the graph on the x-axis. What do I mean? I mean, if you want a domain or you want to give a domain of a graph, what you need to check, you have to check that on the negative side of the x-axis, does your graph exist? If it exists, where does it start to exist and where does it end to exist? So that's why I say the domain is the availability of the graph, the existence of the graph on where on the x-axis. When we talk about the domain, we talk about the x-axis. We check where does it exist on an x-axis. We check where is it available on the x-axis. And whenever we gauge the range and the domain, we always start checking the negative side and go to the positive side. So we're going to put to the negative side, which is here, which they were here, they're going to be negative numbers. We check this graph. Does it exist on the negative numbers here? Where does it start to exist on the negative numbers? So on the negative numbers, as you can see here, it starts from where? From the negative infinity. We don't know where does it start, but it starts from the negative infinity. This arrow here shows the availability of it from the negative infinity. So on the negative side, it starts from the negative infinity. So where does it end? It ends where? On the positive infinity. Why? Is because on the positive side of the y-axis, it does not end, it keeps going. This arrow here, it shows that this kind of graph, it continuous. So we just cut it so that it can be able to but it keeps going there until infinity. So our domain of this kind of stuff is going to be what? Is going to be an x element from where? From negative infinity to the positive infinity. Where does this kind of graph exist on the x-axis? It exists from the negative infinity to where? To positive infinity. And another way to represent it is to just say an x is an element of real number, because it exists in all the x-axis of the Cartesian plane there. So when we talk about the range is just the opposite of this one. It's the existence of the graph on the y-axis. This time around, we're not checking the x-axis, we're checking what? The y-axis. Where does it start to exist and where does it end to exist? Where? In our Cartesian plane. So if you can take a look here, every time we start with the negative side. So on the negative sides, which is these are the negative sides of our graph, where does it start to exist? On the negative side, it starts from the negative infinity, we don't know where, but it also ends where? On the positive side, which is positive infinity, we don't know where. So the range is going to be y element from where? From negative infinity to positive infinity. In other words, you can be able to represent it as x element of real number, y element of real number. Sorry for that name. So since this one is an y, is the relationship between what? The y-axis. So now let's just take a look at the second graph here, which is here. So if we want the domain of this one, remember the domain, we check the availability of the graph on where? On the x-axis. Where does it start to exist, this graph, on the negative side? If you can take a look at this kind of graph, it starts to exist where? From the -3 on the x-axis. When we talk about the domain, we talk about the x-axis. So it starts from the -3. Where does it end? It goes and goes until 1, which is 1 here. So this graph actually, it exists between what? Between -3 and 1 actually, because on the coordinate of -4, does it exist? There is no graph here. It does not exist. So when we talk about the domain, we talk about where does this kind of graph exist, or which interval does this kind of graph exist, where can we find this, and where does it end? So hence I say the domain is the availability of what? Or of the graph, or the existence of the graph in the Cartesian plane. So we start from the -3. It exists from between -3 and what? And 1. We can be able to say it like this. It's an x element from where? From -3 to where? to 1, Another way to say this one, you can just say is between -3 and 1. You can say it like this. You say x between -3 and what? And 1. This means in between. This is the sign of saying in between, So what about the range of this kind of stuff? Remember, when we talk about the range, we talk about what? The y-axis. And whenever we gauge this kind of stuff, we start on the negative side. So we want to check the negative side of this kind of stuff. So the negative side is this one, which here is what is -4. So here is -4. So this graph is start from where? It's an y element. From where? From -4. Where does it end? If you can go on the y-axis here, it ends here on the 2, on the y value, which is 2. It starts from -4 to where? To 2. So it's going to be to 2. So in other ways to represent this, we're just going to put y here and put in between. This means in between, guys. We're going to learn it more when we go forward in our journey. It's going to be 2 and the -4. But you put y just because we talk about the y-axis right now when we talk about what? The range. These two notations are the notations that we're going to use. Any one of this going to give you marks, still going to be the same. So what I want you to take away here, which is very easy, whenever we talk about the range in the domain of a linear, it's always going to be this an x element of real number if it's a domain, and it's going to be always going to be an y element of real number. Why do I say so? It's because it's rare in an exam to bring a graph like this. This one was just an example, but I saw one exam question that has this something like this. So you just have to be careful when it does not continue. But if there's continuous lines here, it means that it starts from the negative infinity to positive infinity. But when they bring something that like this does not have a continuous line, it means that it has in between on it. But in most cases, the domain is always x element of real number and the range is y element of real number, because the graph that they usually bring in your exam, it is continuous line. So whenever they ask the range of the linear, you just have to check the continuous line there. If there's a continuous lines, you can be able to write it like this. So this is it for this video. See you on my next video. Ciao.